When I was in high school, my dad was a prepper. He was stockpiling food, weapons, the usual. Of course, as a high schooler, I was like, whatever, Dad. I'll tell my friends about our rice and bean stockpile if I want to tell my friends about our rice and bean stockpile. The first rule of prepping is that you don't talk about prepping. It was a lot, but on some level, I understood his motive to have the means to take care of us, no matter what happened. And I also understood the fear. I knew kids who had been displaced from Hurricane Katrina who had joined my school. After graduating high school in 2008, I pursued a bachelor's degree in environmental studies. This grounded my sense of impending disaster in the sciences and humanities. For example, I learned about the planetary boundaries framework, developed by 28 renowned scientists at the Stockholm Center for Resilience at Stockholm University in Sweden. This model outlines 9 environmental boundaries that enable humanity to thrive. In 2009, 3 of these boundaries had been crossed: climate change, biogeochemical flows in our nitrogen cycle, and biosphere integrity related to habitat loss and biodiversity decline. This model has evolved and been updated throughout the years, and in its latest publication in 2023, all 9 boundaries were assessed and 6 of them had been crossed. This past June, a new research study was published suggesting a 7th boundary, ocean acidification, has also been crossed. It's hard to look at all the orange and red on this chart and feel optimistic about our odds for a stable future. There are infinite ways to slice and dice this predicament we're in, to better understand it, to better do something about it, to better hold the cognitive dissonance we're all feeling as we try to both grasp this information and navigate the realities of our daily lives at the same time, hoping for the best, hoping we can make some small difference. In my 20 years of trying, the thing that has brought me the most hope and the greatest sense of awe and possibility has been helping to grow a community food forest on public parkland in Austin, Texas. There is a place at the very center of Austin where butterflies sip nectar peacefully in the shadow of a mega highway. Passion flowers bloom and crawl across moringa and sweet almond verbena trees, and people gather from near and far to learn how to grow forested gardens full of edible and medicinal plants. This place is called Festival Beach Food Forest, and it is a beautiful, inspiring, community-led space on public parkland. There is no entrance or membership fee, and the harvest is free for anyone to enjoy and share. It's the first food forest on public parkland in Texas, thanks to the organizing and advocacy of a handful of people who started this conversation in 2012 and planted the first 100 new fruit and nut trees in the fall of 2015. In those first years, the trees were itty-bitty, no taller than me, but the daikon radishes were as big as my head. A few years in, things really started to take off. The trees were growing taller, a canopy started to form, more people were showing up. I have watched and helped Festival Beach Food Forest to grow over 10 years, and it's been one of the most transformative, positive experiences of my life. And I'm not alone in this. I have seen it bring joy, connection, transformation to hundreds and thousands of people. And that's why I'm here to tell you why every community needs a food forest. As climate change and habitat loss are destabilizing communities and ecosystems the whole world over, people are looking for hope, and they're looking for solutions that they can be a part of, that are tangible and achievable in a modern context. Food forests hit the mark. They support both human communities and the complex living systems that surround us to thrive and adapt. You might be thinking, okay, what even is a food forest and where do they come from? A food forest is a forest that is also a garden full of edible, medicinal, and native plants that are grown using techniques that model natural ecosystems so that these plants and the animals and fungi are supporting each other and thriving in what we call a polyculture, a cultivated ecosystem. There are usually multiple layers of cultivation in a food forest. I'll give you examples using the plants we grow at our food forest in Central Texas. You have an overstory of tall, big trees, such as pecans, walnuts, and oaks, and then a subcanopy of slightly smaller trees like peaches and figs, and then shrubs, things like blackberries and roses, and a herbaceous layer, things like echinacea and sunflower and other medicinal plants, culinary herbs. And then we have rooting crops that go down into the earth. These are sweet potatoes and radishes. And in that earth, we have our mycelial fungi and the other living organisms that form a soil food web. The mycelial fungi are the root-like structure of a fungus that web throughout the soil, and they carry nutrients, moisture, and even chemical signals that communicate the needs and the warnings from one plant to another in exchange for carbohydrates and sugars that these plants create during photosynthesis. Fungi are not plants, but they are essential plant allies for any healthy forest. Helping to cover and protect this soil from erosion or sun exposure, we have ground cover plants such as mint and thyme. And crawling all over this, we have our vines, things like grapes and passion flower. By planting in all these different layers, we create a very dense, very biodiverse system. And this biodiversity helps this food system to be resilient and adaptive as it experiences challenges over time. For example, there is a community food forest in Morocco that is said to be over 2,000 years old and still here today. It has an overstory of dates and an understory of olives and citrus and many other crops. At one point in human history, food forests were the primary method of growing food in tropical regions around the world. They are a truly ancient method of food production that has roots in the traditional ecological knowledge of original nations and indigenous peoples. In recent decades, food forests have been a way to practice permaculture, which is a sustainable design philosophy that emerged from Tasmania in the 1970s through the writing and teaching of Bill Mollison and David Holmgren. Permaculture has three core ethics: care for people, care for the planet, and practicing a fair share so that the conditions needed for abundance are distributed throughout your entire system and maintained for future generations. Permaculture also has some sustainable design principles that are very helpful when you're planning or maintaining a food forest. These can also be applied to things like urban planning. You can create a food forest at a private home, a farm, an orchard, but a community food forest is one that is accessible to the broader public. These are often found on vacant lots, public parkland, conservation areas, school campuses, churches, and health clinics. Volunteers from all walks of life come together to install and maintain them. And sometimes there's even institutional support from city budgets or grants or private institutions to help cover staffing and operating expenses. According to the Community Food Forest Handbook by Catherine Bukowski and John Munsell, there was a surge in popular awareness and interest in food forests across North America that began during the Great Recession of 2008, when people saw the idea of growing food together as a community as a means to feel both productive and collaborative in the midst of a shared struggle. This handbook was published in 2018, and at the time there were 70 known community food forests across the United States. Catherine Bukowski has a website called communityfoodforest.com that has a map of 84 such projects across the US. It has been occasionally updated since 2020, but I would bet, despite the many challenges and setbacks of the COVID-19 pandemic, that the number of community food forests is continuing to grow. Rates of food insecurity are currently approaching, if not surpassing, what they were during the Great Recession of the early 2000s. By creating a public food forest, it helps both physical and mental well-being. It broadens universal access to healthy, locally grown, affordable foods, especially when paired with educational efforts to introduce people to perennial and medicinal plants that they might be less familiar with, and to best practices for how to harvest and use these things safely and ethically. It has been broadly studied and affirmed that spending time outside in green spaces is beneficial for our mental health. A food forest helps to keep these spaces accessible even during extreme heat conditions, something we know very well about here in Texas. And that's because it provides a microclimate through the natural shade canopy of the trees. We have been studying our microclimate at Festival Beach Food Forest, and we have found that in the peak of summer, it can be 2 degrees cooler and feels 10 degrees cooler in the food forest than in the sun-exposed adjacent parklands. Overheating is a serious public health risk, especially for the elders in our community and for people who have compromised immune systems. Food forests can help make outdoor spaces safe for them. We have also been studying this question of how community food forests and how our food forest is supporting well-being through this notion of gifts, things that we receive and give freely that we're grateful for. 2 years ago, we started asking people what are the gifts that they received during their time at the forest at our programming. And then we analyzed their responses using Manfred Max Neef's model of fundamental human needs, the need for identity, protection, freedom, leisure, affection, participation, sustenance, understanding, and creation. We found that every human need in this model was met to some degree at the food forest, and people especially felt a heightened sense of participation, sustenance, leisure, affection, and understanding. Robin Wall Kimmerer is an author, a teacher, an ethnobotanist, and a leading voice in our nation about this notion of a gift economy, of giving and receiving gifts through this model of reciprocity. She speaks beautifully to this concept in her many books and talks. And in a recent talk with the Museum of Science in Boston, published July of 2025, Robin Wall Kimmerer says this: "How are we going to fall in love with the world if we don't pick berries, right? That's the gateway. Or harvesting a bouquet of flowers. It seems to me that we need reserves that are not just about biodiversity protection, but are places of engagement with the natural world, the living world. We need parks that are set up for berry picking or sweetgrass harvesting so that we come to love the world again." For those of us involved in creating and maintaining these kinds of spaces, community food forests or edible foraging parks, the gifts given and received are off the charts. I highly recommend it. It's not easy per se to set up this kind of space, but it is so worth it. The people who are adopting this ancient practice are broadening universal access to the gifts of fruits, nuts, medicinal plants, localized ecological knowledge and education, forested green spaces that are climate resilient. We are restoring our planetary boundaries in small but tangible ways and restoring a cultural framework of reciprocity and mutuality with the living world and with each other. We live in very scary times on so many fronts. And while it may be tempting and not necessarily unreasonable to build a bunker, I really want to encourage you to build a community food forest instead. Thank you.